17 of the fantasy football season. And if you made it to your championship, congratulations. But here's a few quarterbacks I will bench this week. In time of recording this video, none of these guys have been placed on the safety or protocol list. The first guy, Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. So Prescott, before that huge ball game in Week 16 versus the Washington football team, he just hasn't been doing much as Prescott over the last few weeks. Week 13 in New Orleans, 238 pass yards, a touchdown, and then Week 14 at Washington, 211 pass yards, a touchdown, 2 win those 15 rushing yards. Week 15 at the Giants, 217 pass yards, a touchdown, and a fumble loss. And then Week 16, he exploded in that ball game versus Washington. But Washington does give up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the year. 330 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and 21 rushing yards. So this week here, tough matchup on paper versus Arizona. That gives up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And Prescott, I don't think he has a great game this week. Arizona is in a must-win situation, and I think the defense is going to come to play in this one. And I think Prescott will only get maybe 18 to 20 fantasy points in this one. And he's tough in a tough matchup. And I know if you made the championship, especially after last week's game, you're going to start him. But right here, I definitely could see him have a dud performance because he's been inconsistent most of the season. The next quarterback's Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans. So Tannehill here, he hasn't been all that great. I know he got A.J. Brown last week, and that was a good ball game for Brown, no doubt about it. But besides that, no one else in this offense, a receiver or a tight end, has done much for this Tennessee team. It's been more of the run game and the defense over the last few weeks. So Week 14 versus Jacksonville, 191 pass yards, 29 rush yards, a touchdown. Week 15 at Pittsburgh, 153 pass yards, an interception, 18 rushing yards, a touchdown, and a fumble loss. And then last week versus San Francisco, 209 pass yards, a touchdown, and 22 rush yards. So this week here, tough matchup on paper for Tannehill versus the Miami Dolphins that give up the 8th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And Tannehill, he's still owned in 65% of fantasy leagues. But right here in a championship game or semifinals, depending if you play a Week 18, but I doubt many people do anymore here, play that last week of the season with teams clinching and superstar players benched. But anyway, I can't trust Tannehill unless he's the only option you really could get. But this week here versus a tough Miami defense, I just don't see him doing much in this ball game. And he's definitely a quarterback I would bench in, the third and final quarterback. Many people might not agree with me that I would bench this week's Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. So right here, he's been limited so far in the early practice sessions of the week here. And that ankle injury, to me, it looked more severe than it was. And obviously, he sat out the last 2 weeks here. And this Raven team has been free-falling now, losing the last 4 ball games here. So no matter what, I think Jackson's going to play. But to be honest, I don't know how that ankle is going to react here with that first hit in this game. And I definitely don't think he's 100%. And we know this Los Angeles Ram team have very heavy hitters on this D-line. You got Aaron Donald, you got Von Miller, who's a beast, and you got Jalen Ramsey, who's one of the best corners in pro football. So this Ram defense, they give up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks in the season. And right here with a bad ankle versus a tough defense, I just don't see Lamar Jackson have a huge fantasy day. Obviously, teams are going to go out there and start him. But right here, I won't have high hopes for him scoring more than 20 fantasy points in this game. And he's a quarterback I will bench. So that's a few quarterbacks I will bench here for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.